Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, where I find you that next great rock and roll book or documentary to check out. This is the podcast that reviews, previews, and most importantly, recommends to you the good stuff. I'm your host, Big Rick. Let's plug in. And today, the spotlight falls on the book Sharing in the Groove, the untold story of the 90s jam band explosion and the scene that followed. It's written by Mike Ayers. When you think of epicenters for different genres in rock and roll, what comes to mind? Memphis, possibly ground zero. LA in the 60s, San Fran in the 60s, Liverpool, Chicago's blues scene, Seattle, no doubt, and Princeton, New Jersey. That's right, Princeton. This book, Sharing in the Groove, it's an oral history, and it opens with a quote from Blues Traveler's manager at the time, David Graham, the son of Billy Graham. And David says, Princeton is one of the forgotten centers of rock and roll. Kind of a stretch, but there was definitely something going on there in the late 80s, no doubt about it. And this is where the book opens. You've got the formation of two bands that it looks at right in the beginning, the Spin Doctors and Blues Traveler, and the connection between the two bands that started up in New Jersey. It might not be as transformative as some of those other locations, but Princeton, New Jersey was definitely the spot for the beginning of the wave known as jam bands. And from there, the tendrils started spreading. You got widespread panic coming out of Athens, Phish in Vermont, Dave Matthews Band in Charlottesville, Virginia. And here's the cool thing about the book, and it's not just about those certain areas. One of the things that made this book so enjoyable to me is that it shows many different chapters and origins of different types of what would be considered a jam band. But Medeski, Martin, and Wood get a ton of pages dedicated to their career. Mo, the story about Mo is in here. The Great Boy All-Stars. Colonel Bruce Hampton and the Aquarian Unit also gets a bunch of pages, which is really cool because I love Colonel Bruce. It's a very wide angle view of the jam band explosion of the 90s, and I didn't expect it to cast such a wide net, so definitely nice job there. Along with charting multiple jam band success and rise of some of them becoming the established acts they are today, you'll also get a taste of kind of like the landscape of what the music industry was like at the time and how record labels had to adjust the way they did business to this new jam band scene and sound. And these were different bands. And the record labels just really had a hard time understanding them and how to promote them. And the book does a really cool job at exploring how these bands dealt with the record labels and how they dealt with making records. They were not bands that sold a ton of records. Other than, you've got the anomaly of a few huge moments. Spin Doctor's first album sold 7 million records. Blues Travelers had big hits with Runaround and Hook. Dave Matthews had Crash Into Me. And those were the real big record sales for those bands. But bands like Phish and Widespread Panic and String Cheese Incident, they're not a really album type of band. And the artists knew that. And they tried to explain that to the record companies. Of course, the record companies are trying to make their money, and how they make it is primarily through the record. So it was an interesting insight and back and forth of another thing that these bands had to overcome to grow their careers and the jam band scene. Another thing that was cool that they explored in the book was the subculture of taping shows. It got a lot of play in the pages because it played a huge part in some of these bands' success. And the bands had a real hard time explaining that one to the record companies. They just couldn't get and understand how taping shows could help their career. A bunch of great chapters look at how taping shows, especially looking at how the Grateful Dead kind of started that whole thing and how it played a major part in how these bands grew such huge, dedicated underground followings and became such huge draws for a live act. Speaking of the Dead, credit to the author, some great research done here, really interesting chapter, and how the bands exploded after Jerry Garcia died. Very interesting kind of way of looking at it after Jerry died and what happened to the scene after Jerry died and how the bands felt really strange about getting all the leftover Deadheads at their shows Widespread Panic and Blues Traveler and Phish really exploded during that time, so they were already ahead of the curve. But those bands just really had a hard time coming to grips with what they called this super growth period, and now starting to see a bunch of deadheads in their audience too. I mean, when they looked out into the crowd, they saw their old fans, but now they saw this mix of deadheads too. So it took a while for them to adjust and feel okay about carrying on kind of the legacy of what the Dead left there. There's a lot to like in this book because it really lays out the map of how across the United States, jam bands grew in very unusual ways. A lot of ways it showed the importance of playing live and putting in the time and being out there on the road. Great examples of the work that went into building an audience, and then how bands, like in some instances, really had to pivot to blend to a new and older fans after they had a hit. Some could handle it, Dave Matthews and the Blues Travelers Band, but some couldn't, like the Spin Doctors. One other band I want to mention, because they got a good chunk of the story and added to the context of this book, and that's God Street Wine. And the reason why I mention them is this band contributed to the early days of the jam band scene, but they just couldn't get over the top. And I'm really glad the author included their story. It provided another view, one that was a little bit different from some of the more popular bands. And it just really expanded the story, and it opened my eyes to this band, God Street Wine, that I didn't really know that much about. There's also a pretty cool personal moment in this book, and I want to shout out to Chris Stillwell of the Great Boy All-Stars, who talks about working at Jimbo's, a natural food store in San Diego. And this is actually where I met my wife. We were both working at Jimbo's in San Diego. We actually started on the same day. Had to throw that one in there. Love you, baby. I didn't realize the jam band tentacles were this long and wide-reaching, and when it was put together and presented in this oral history fashion with big names contributing, you got Trey Anastasio, Dave Matthews is in here, Derek Trucks, John Popper, Steve Lillywhite, John Medeski, all the big players contributed to this story. The reach of the jam band world, it turns out to be much bigger and a lot more interesting than I ever expected. Sharing in the Groove, the untold story of the 90s jam band explosion and the scene that followed by Mike Ayers, is 393 pages, and I highly recommend this one. Today's episode is sponsored by the Outlaw Music Festival 10th Anniversary branded merchandise. That's right, all that cool merch that is being put together to honor these outlaws out on that tour. Willie Nelson, Bob Dylan, Billy String, Sheryl Crow's with them. And here's the cool part about it, if that wasn't cool enough. 3 of you are going to be wearing that amazing swag soon, because the Outlaw Festival was kind enough to offer the Rock Talk Studio listeners some of this great 10th anniversary merchandise. All you need to do to win is send me an email at info@rocktalkstudio.com. That puts you in the drawing. Rock Talk Studio Blast members, the people that have signed up for my newsletter, you are automatically entered in to win the merchandise. I'm also going to be dropping a link in the show notes so you can check out all the amazing shirts, hoodies, and hats that you just might be repping soon. Before I wrap up and give you a little sneak peek to what's coming up next week, I just want to mention that Rock Talk Studio Blast newsletter that I was talking about. It's free. It comes out once a month, the last Friday of the month, and it gets you all the information you need to know about the world of rock and roll books and documentaries. It kind of takes this podcast and just blows it up even wider. So you get all the new releases that are coming out, all the dates, all the announcements. There's a ton of really cool stuff out there. A new Ozzy memoir was just announced. A new Jeff Buckley documentary was just announced. A new Patti Smith memoir. Tons of really cool stuff coming down the road. Again, if you want to sign up for that, subscriptions are free. info@rocktalkstudio.com. Okay, next week, calling all deadheads, calling all gearheads. We are talking The Wall. And then we're not talking Pink Floyd. We're talking Grateful Dead's sound system. There's a new book that just came out, and it takes a look at the iconic stride in the live sound that the Dead and a handful of their cohorts took by revolutionizing the concert experience and building the wall of sound. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love talking rock and roll with you, especially when I get to talk about a cool book and turn you on to a good read. Sharing in the Groove about those jam bands, if you're into that scene, really good rock and roll book. Don't forget to jump into those show notes, check out that really cool Outlaw Festival merchandise. 3 of you are going to be wearing it, so pick out something that you want to take a look at. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll catch you next time in the Rock Talk studio.